how to sculpt. Ooh, baby, how to sculpt. Yeah. How to sculpt.
Thank you, Eli, otherwise known as Red Wet Skeleton, for that jazzy new intro to the How to Sculpt series. This one's a little different. It's going to be a conversion tutorial, but there's going to be some sculpting involved. And it's going to focus on how to convert a regular doggy-looking quadrupedal gaunt into something badass and a little more threatening like this, which is a normal gaunt that's been made bipedal. So I just started experimenting with these recently, and I'm really feeling them. And a lot of people seem to be feeling them as well. And my buddy online, the Zolak, on Instagram, asked me if I can make a tutorial on how to make these. And because they're complicated, but they're not hard, I figured it would be a good tutorial subject. So here you go. So all you need to do this, what I would recommend is you get a good pair of clippers. I got mine off of Amazon. They're Engineer Micro Nippers NS04 or something. Someone recommended them on Twitter, and these are amazing. Between 30 and 50 bucks, I can't remember, but they're amazing. I highly recommend those. So a good pair of clippers that are nice and sharp. You're gonna need like a blade for cleaning up. I love using rounded blades rather than straight blades, but you can use a straight blade. A flash scraper. I use the Citadel one because I've not seen other people really put them out, and I bought this a long time ago. You can use a knife to clean stuff, but this is also really useful for cleaning. A pin vise. If you're going to be a scrub, you can not pin things. I know some people are afraid of pinning, especially when it comes to plastic models. They're like, I'll just pour a shitload of plastic cement on it and everything will be good. I recommend having a pin vise for this and pinning. So what you want is you want a very fine pin. The diameter of it is 0.6 millimeters. I try to do this with a larger pin. It's just a pain in the ass because we're going to be cutting up these gaunts and we're going to be pinning the legs in to get them into a good pose, and there's not much material to pin into. Also, the benefit of a small pin like this is that it's very flexible, so you'll be able to bend it very easily to get like legs into a proper position. You could be a scrub and use Tamiya cement or whatever your plastic glue of choice is to just like glob things together, but there isn't always going to be good contact points in this, so I highly recommend pinning. Even plastic models. People are annoyed by pinning, I think, but it's a really good way to make sure your model doesn't break down, and it's a really good way to get the pose that you want. Also, some super glue, because you're going to be using it for your pins. Some filler. You can use green stuff, but it's kind of expensive for what we're going to be doing. So I'm using Abe's Fix-It Sculpt because it's cheaper than green stuff, and also because it cures a little more solid than green stuff does, although green stuff will be good for filling on this. Another thing that we're going to get into when it comes to like filling, I'm going to show you how to use a combination of baking soda and super glue to do kind of like quick and dirty gap filler if you want it. But this is optional, you don't need that. And then the last thing that I left out, one of the most important tools for this conversion that I think makes it way, way easier is a chisel scalpel blade. I discovered these a couple of years ago, and they are just amazing for everything. I mentioned this on Instagram, that you should get a chisel scalpel blade, but just go and get one. You can get smaller ones than this, you don't need the big giant handle, but as you'll see in this is amazing. You can do this with a normal blade, but you're gonna be chumpy. You can also do this with a razor saw or a jeweler's saw or something similar, but again, it's just going to take more time and be annoying. This thing is amazing. So this video is going to teach you that how to convert gaunts to be upright and also how to use a chisel blade. So first thing you want to do is, right now I've got like one whole gaunt, so this is all the bits for one gaunt. So I've got the alternated legs, whatever. If you want to cheat, what you can do is on a gaunt sprue, they're alternating. So some of the gaunts have like these extra legs that plug in on the left side of their body, and some of them have the extra legs that plug in on the right side of their body. And that means that on some of the gaunts, the right leg is flat on the tab there, and in some of the gaunts, it's the left leg that's flat on the tab. So a hack for this, we're going to get into it, but we're going to be chopping these legs off and then pinning them in to position them. If you want to go for you want to make your gaunts upright, but you want some of them to be running or leaping or something like that, you can cheat and you can take the flat left leg off of one gaunt and the flat right leg off another gaunt, and then put those together to have two flat legs, which is what I did for this hive node. I ripped off the left one and I ripped off the right one, and I've got two flat feet so you can stand on it. And then you could either, if you got lots of gaunts, you can just throw away these other feet, or you can save two of these weird feet that aren't flat on the ground for a gaunt that's like jumping or a weird pose or something like that. You take your chisel blade. You could do this with a clipper,
if you just like get in there and you clip flat. But hell, I'm telling you to use a chisel blade. So you get your chisel blade, you line it up with the bottom of the hoof, and you just pop it down. Make sure it's more or less flat. Yeah, it's more or less flat. The other thing I would recommend is going in and cleaning all the flash marks off your gaunts. I'm not going to do that for this video because that's really boring to watch. This one we have the little middle arm thing attached to the hoof, so I'm just going to get the chisel blade in there, pop that off. And then, so the gun arms are pretty much good. We don't have to do anything with those. These guys, we're going to want to free the extra leg from the, whatever that extra arm thing is. You can keep the ribbing on here if you want, because like once you've got the leg off, you could totally get this and just like stick it in there. But the issue then is that when this gaunt's upright, you've got an arm that's just like sticking out. And like maybe that works for you. Like this guy is going to be like, he's supposed to be a hive node, so he's like gesticulating with his arm to tell the gaunts where to go. So I just left that arm up. That's fine. But for oh, this one, I'm lazy apparently. I also left this one sticking up, holding the gun. But you can see with this one, I have it more kind of hanging down. And I think the same one with this guy. Yeah, it's kind of more hanging down. So your call. For this gaunt, what I'm going to do is he's going to be just holding his flesh bore and just kind of stalking, looking around. So I want this arm to be separate from the rib piece. So I'm going to use my handy dandy chisel. I'm going to come in on kind of an angle here, because if you look at the back of this arm, it's just like a big flat block. And I want to kind of trim some of that out. So I'm going to come in on an angle here. At this point, if you're smart, I always forget to do this. You can just take the ribs and just like glue them in there, because then that means you don't have to go in and sculpt that little detail in there later. And you can trim this stuff off. So don't glue this in yet. I screwed up and put it in too soon. So before you glue that weird rib section in there, that you just cut off the legs and the arm, you want to cut out this leg and the arm, because it's just going to get in your way otherwise. There's a couple ways to do this. You take your clippers, and what you can do is you can kind of get in here. You're going to remove the tail. You'll pin it back on after, but you're going to remove it anyway, so don't be too dear about it. You can kind of save this detail. But I would get in here with some clippers. You're making sure you're not marring the detail on the top of the leg, so just cut in there. You can see the tail's coming loose. That's fine. Actually, no. I'll use the chisel for that. The beauty of this is that if you're trying to do this with a knife, you'd be going like this, and your force is going this way, but the knife blade is up there. Whereas with the chisel, you can like direct all of your force behind the chisel right on the line where you want it to cut. So get it right in there and kind of wiggle it in. The only thing to be careful here is that you might pop the hoof off if you put too much pressure on it. So I'm just wiggling this in up here. And I'm not going all the way through. I'm kind of going part way in, and then I'm going to come around the back and follow this line of the leg around. Wiggle it around. Just be careful when you're doing this, because if you cut through that thing, this is going to go shooting, and it might shoot it. I chiseled in the back here. I can kind of get it in here. Go slow and steady, so you don't shoot through and jab yourself in the hand or anything like that. There's like a seam or like a joint here, kind of just wiggling it along the joint. Again, don't put too much pressure on the lower leg, because you'll snap that hoof right off. I like approaching from this angle because it's kind of the chisel's kind of like on the angle of the leg. Also, just be careful you're not marring the back carapace plates. So there, we have one free leg. We got a lot of junk in here that we can clean up, because the thing is, we're going to take this gaunt, we're going to put it upright, and then this stuff's going to be like sticking out. So I would just come in with my clippers. Don't get too crazy, because you do need some stuff to pin into, some material to pin into. So just kind of clean a bit out. This was actually part of the leg that I left on, so just going to cut that out. I'm trying to save this detail in here so I don't have to go and resculpt it. I've got a bit of the hoof on the end of the little claw, so I'll just clean that off. If you got it's like this and the tail's sticking straight down, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So you can see that with these guys, what I did was the first one I managed to keep the tail attached here, and there was actually a big piece of plastic here, and I kind of like hinged the tail back, and I shoved a spacer in there to keep it hinged back. More trouble than it's worth. I would just say go in here with your chisel blade, and you can follow like the line of this carapace plate, but you don't actually need that much sticking on the end of the tail, because once you cut it here and you hinge it down, all that stuff's going to be sticking out the front of the gaunt. So now the tail is separate. And what we're going to do with the tail is that we're going to put a tiny little pin in this end and a tiny little hole in there, and we're going to pin it in there, and then we're going to hinge it up like that. And then later on, we'll talk about bending the tail. You can heat it up. A very easy way to heat the kind of plastic of tails and bend them is if you have a halogen lamp, because they get pretty hot. But I am very lucky that I have a heat gun. So that works very well at heating up plastic. And that's how I bent the tails on these two dudes. I heated them. You can see this one's a little bit shiny. That's because it got a bit too much of the heat. So you just heat them up, you bend them, and then you stick them in cold water, and they set. For now, you get your pin vise, and you make sure that you've got a bit that corresponds to the diameter of the pin you're using. Like I mentioned earlier, use a thinner pin. When I was doing these guys, I was stupid, and I used, I don't know if you can see it anywhere, I used really thick pins, and like they were so thick that they barely fit in those little skinny arms. And the problem that I had using a larger pin was that when you get in, like you're pinning the tail into here, there's very little plastic, you can see. There's very little stuff to pin into there, and very little stuff to pin into here, so a large pin, maybe you'll shove it in there. But then you get to a point where you got to take the legs, and you got to pin the legs onto the body, and then you're trying to shove a giant ass pin up through there, but this is hollow on the back, and it's just a mess. Before I pin the tail in, I just got to remember to take this other arm off because I want to be able to pose it. You can put a razor saw in here and cut it off, but I just think this thing's quicker and more fun. So I will go in behind the arm here with my chisel, and then I will come in here to separate it from the rib cage. Again, don't put too much force, like pushing down on the model, because this thing is going to snap right off. Very smart. Again, and don't push too hard here, because you don't want to cut right through the arm. You can see the arm's flexing there, getting a little stress. The hardest part is this part where it's like along the body. So what I usually do is I get this corner of the chisel and I shove it down in here, and I just kind of work my way up the arm from that lower corner. Again, careful you don't stab yourself in the arm, careful you don't kill the carapace. You can always fix the carapace, but I'm lazy, so I don't want to have to like resculpt stuff. I kind of get in here and I like wiggle down. I'm more worried about the carapace than I am about this crap in here, because it's probably going to be obscured by the arm anyway. So if you mar that, that's okay. So I'm doing kind of like a triangle where it's like point here and pull down. Here. Cutting that a bit, but it's probably fine. It's going to be a gun arm in front of it. So just kind of working my way around that little arm. Again, easy way, just leave it in, have it sticking out for some reason, but I don't want this guy. Yay, I didn't cut it! Oh shit, I did cut it. Oh fuck. I'm gonna put some plastic glue on that and hope for the best, because this arm is not really that, but I do want it to look not that busted. Okay, so I got it out, but I was putting too much pressure and I slipped and I cut it right there. Ooh, the point of doing that was that so you can have this here and you can like pose it so it's hanging down, pose it so it's going across the body, something else. So you probably want to, oh shit, I kind of marred the carapace a bit. Probably want to clean this up a bit. You could get your pin vise and get a large bit and just kind of drill in there to lightly to clean it out. Or you could get your handy dandy Games Workshop seam ripper. This thing I love. I feel like mine's getting a little blunt, but it is good time. So we've got the arm out, and then we just want to do the same thing we did on the other one, which is clear off this big block of plastic on the back. So I'm just going to get my clippers, make sure I'm not cutting too deep into the arm itself. Going to check both sides. Line her up. Boom! You can do a little bit of cleaning here. Again, this side is going to be visible. This side probably won't, so you don't have to worry too much about it being gross and ugly. So we have one arm, a leg, we got a leg. Where's that other arm? We got another arm here. Oh, I never cleaned that one off. So same thing here. We're going to line it up, cut off the back. All right, so we've got the body, we've got the head, we've got the legs. Last cut that you need to make is that with the gaunts, because they're meant to be horizontal, the way their heads go on, when they're horizontal, it makes sense. When they're standing up, vertical,
that just looks pretty fucking awkward. And you can kind of like bend it around, and like if you have them like in a kind of not totally vertical pose, but kind of leaning forward pose, maybe that's gonna be okay to have it like that, but I think it's fine. So what I do is I cut the neck off, flip it around 180 degrees, so it's pointing forward. Let's see if I can show you.
So you can't really see it there because it's in behind his head and his armor plate, but that neck is curving forward, not curving back. So once again, you could do it with the cutters, but then you're gonna get not a flat surface on the back of this thing when you clip it off like that. Handy dandy chisel tool, however, will give you a flat surface. When I started doing these, I did this like really epic cut where I cut like right along here, so it left this little armor plate on the back. been less careful lately, because I realized that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna preserve all this detail, and then like I glue it on, and then I wind up like puttying over it anyway, and I don't know. So let's see how much I can preserve. I was trying to cut from here, but it's tough to cut from there because then you get the front of these armor plates, which you want to like save if you can. So I find it's kind of good to cut from the side, although I guess cutting off a bit of this armor plate is not bad. What I want to do is I want to preserve this kind of breastbone feature here. So I want to keep it above that, but losing a bit of this plate probably isn't a bad thing. Because, like, realistically, you only really need that part back of the plate. So, line it up along this. And go in. You might want to do it from both sides, so that it doesn't go on a weird angle. Or you can just, you know, YOLO it and hope for the best. So kind of get it vertical, and then don't lose your neck when it goes firing off your model. Oh, the other side's not bad. I got that armor plate in there, that's cool. And I didn't do too much damage to the actual model. You can see there that I did a weird angle. It's kind of up on one side, but nah, who cares? You can take it and just kind of put it like that and just plastic glue that shit back on. It's not ideal because the gaunt head is very far forward. Depending on like the kind of like pose you want for your gaunt, that could be very lurchy. What you can do is you can move it back a bit, cut off that extra armor plate, and then this doesn't look quite as bad. But what I've really found is that the best way to do it is to angle it up a bit, and it gives them a little more height. And the way I do that is I put a little pin in there to get like from there to there. I don't want the neck to be so far forward. I want it to be kind of like back here and then up a bit. So this armor plate that I worked so hard to preserve is pretty much erroneous. You can line it up in such a way that like you sculpt it or you put another armor plate in the back, blah, blah, blah. But I'm just going to use my handy dandy chisel again, line it up along there, follow the angle, cut it right off. So we've got the main torso, we've got the neck, don't lose the neck. We've got the two legs. This one I need to clean up a bit, but whatever. We've got the two little claw arms, and we've got the gun arm, which we haven't done anything with. You can start wherever the hell you want. I'm going to start with the neck, so I don't forget about it. This is where it's useful to have like a little tiny pin vise and little tiny pins. I usually just take the pin vise and start pinning, but then it skitters all over the place, so helpful to take a blade, point of a blade, and just lightly turn it where you want the pin to go in, and then this will stick right to that hole. Don't drill like this, because then you're going to go straight through the top of that thing. Try to line it up with the line of the neck. You don't have to, but then you've got more material to work with. So when you're here, don't go like that, go more like this. Don't put too much flex on these small drill bits because they will snap. I've done it before. So you don't need a lot of, because it's a plastic model, you don't need a lot of depth to your hole, just enough to get a bit of a pin in. Also, I found like the smaller the bit, the quicker it chews through plastic. You'll get your little pin, get your super glue of choice. I got Arms Keeper, because that's what's cheap at my local friendly hobby shop. Okay, and then just shove your pin in that little hole with the glue. There you go. And again, you need a little bit of pin, because what's going to happen is that this is not going to sit flush with the pin. What you're going to do is you're going to use the pin to hinge it up a bit. So because these pins are so small, I can probably bend this, yep, just in the hole. Okay, and I just got to eyeball where I want it to sit in the model. I think it's going to go about there. And then you can angle this hole based on the pin, but I don't fucking know. Again, the beauty of these pins is they're so thin that you can just bend them. You don't have to worry about the holes lining up perfectly. I usually use a different pair of clippers to cut pins because these are my really good plastic snips, but these pins are so small that I can nip them, and what I tend to do is I do it right at the tip of the nips, because the tip of the nips, because I don't tend to use that cutting sprue. Alright, so then you stick it in the hole, and you just kind of like, here you can see I'm kind of flexing it, lining it up, bending it. Let's see what the angle is the other guy really liked. Can't really see because I puttied it, that's great. So you can kind of eyeball it, stick a head on there, have it look around. That looks pretty good. And because you're doing the pin, it doesn't really matter that the angle here is wonky. It's only a little bit wonky. So stick some glue on the other end of that pin. Oh shit, this thing is flowing. Oh, it's because I had it lying on its side. That's why there's so much glue coming out. That's going to glue itself shut, and I'm going to curse it later. Stick your pin in the hole. Just make sure it's lined up right. Test with your head. He's going to be going there. He's going to be looking to the left because his buddy was looking to the right. No, his buddy's looking to the right. This guy's going to be looking to the left. Okay, gotcha. That's all right. There we go. So that's that. Next, let's get the tail onto the body. So same thing as the last stage. You want to drill a hole in the tail, drill a hole in the body, use that same little tiny pin, and then stick them together. So I will do the drilling. This is really useful to like use your blade to stick this, because when you cut this out, it's going to be missing material on one side, and there's going to be a lot of material on the other side, and like if you just try and skitter your pin vise across, it's probably going to wind up poking through that end. So you really want to get a guide hole. It will be left or one side of center because you're lacking material here, but that's okay. We can fix it. So do that. Drill a hole. Okay. And then drill a hole in the body. So you can kind of, there's more material on this side of the body as well. Let's see there. I'm going to hinge it up like that. So the other hole should go kind of in here. Right there. Okay, and drill a hole. Okay, now let's stick this pin into this tail. Or my globby glue. You want to leave a little bit more like pin sticking out here because you're going to plug it in there, but then you're going to flex it. So there's going to be some pins sticking out. These ones have to go slightly deeper in just because you're flexing them. So you want the material to be able to, the plastic to be able to support the flexing. And then what you do is you flex it like that. So the tail is this little, got these little nubbins on the top of the tail. They should be pretty much contacting that armor plate. You can check to make sure like those nubbins should probably be lining up with that armor plate. You can flex them a little bit to the left, to the right, depending on which way you're going to curve the tail, but you can also just curve the tail once that's it. So there we go. And yeah, so that's the tail is now attached. The neck is attached. And now we got to get the legs in. So same deal where we're going to put some pins in the legs. I said I wasn't going to clean, but I'm cleaning. Okay, so the easy stat, if you were to do that cheat thing that I said at the beginning where you got 2 flat legs, I'm going to show you how to put that in, make it easy. Just like you did for the tail, you're going to put a pin in this leg. I'm going to clear some of this material off because it's chunky and ugly, and it's going to show up because the legs are more upright and spread. Next, you gotta pin the legs to the pelvis area. As you can see here, there's not a lot of material in this pelvis because we've clipped it all to hell. So what I tend to do is I don't actually pin the legs into the pelvis. I put like, because I've got these skinny little pins and they're really long, I run a pin into the leg and then I wind up pinning the leg up in here somewhere, like up in the kind of waist area, because I have material there to pin into. And you've got a long pin, so it doesn't really matter that it's way down here. And then what I do is I fill in, there's a big gap, and I either fill it in with some putty, some cheap filler putty, or on this guy, because I was impatient, I filled it in with a mix of baking soda and super glue, which is a cheap, easy way, if a little messy, to quickly fill gaps. I'll do both. It doesn't really matter where you put the pin in here, but because you're not, like usually when you're doing a pin, you have it stick out straight and it sticks straight into the side that it's going to go into. So we could put it here, but that's kind of an awkward place for a leg. The leg used to be in this general vicinity, so you want to keep it in that general vicinity, but there's nothing there to pin into. So what I would advise you do is you pin into this mass up here, and for that reason, we're going to have the pin, instead of coming out on a straight angle like this, we're going to have it kind of angled up like that. So that means that we're going to put a little guide hole up near the top of it here. There's a lot of space to mess around here, so you don't really have to worry about getting it exactly right. And once we get it in, because it's such a thin pin, we can reorganize the direction of it. Again, we're not pinning it in like this. We're pinning it in on an angle like this, because then there's more material to drill into. If you're having trouble with the guide hole, start horizontal and then kind of slowly angle it up. You don't want to do it too quick because you might snap that bit. And then once you got it to the good angle, just keep going further in like that. Going in on that angle, so I'm kind of, if I kept drilling all the way through, I'd come out over here, but that's a long way, and you don't need to go in that far. I do put it in further than just like a little touch. Like when we did it, where did we pin? Because once the pin is in, we might flex this a bit to kind of get the right pose when it's pinned into the body. Flex it, flex it. And when you're dealing with plastic and you're pinning plastic, if you have a very shallow hole, the pin will probably just rip right through the plastic. So you want a little more depth. So that pin is going in much of a depth. Let's see. So there's about that much inside the model, which is, you know, not a ton, but that'll be enough to anchor it when we try and flex it. Okay, so I'm gonna put some glue on there. We need to leave a goodly amount because we're not going right beside it. So I would hold up the leg, hold up the model, eyeball where you want it to go, and then kind of gauge how much pin you need. You could angle this up a bit more, maybe. Better to always make your pins longer than shorter, because you can always clip bits off the end if they're too long, but it's really hard to add more on if they're too short. So it's there, and I'm going to put it, I want that leg to wind up kind of here-ish. And again, I'm starting the hole straight in, just a little guide, and then I'm angling it up because I've got more, like if you look, I've got very little material across, but I've got a lot of material up above to get into. There's another place where we want the hole to be a little deeper, just in case you need to flex that pin, you don't want it tearing out. So then you shove that in that there hole, and then you just kind of check. That leg seems a bit far forward for me. Oh shit, I'm flexing the tail. So I can... This is a bit buggered. I should have paid attention. Because that leg is a little far forward, is it? Or is it okay? It might be okay. What I can do here is, this is too far forward, I can drill another hole here. In fact, that's probably what I'll do. Because the problem is that, like, once you've got this, like, lined up in such a way, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to flex that pin, but then you're, like, flexing it back, and then it's, like, weird angles. I'm just going to drill another one. Right there. Okay, now the leg is more in the area that I want. Don't pay attention to, like, how awkward this tail looks, because we're going to curve it up. Actually, this leg might be a little high. No, I don't know. That's okay. It's also the case that because of the way the gaunts are set up, this tail is going to come down a lot further here than you might want it. So you might want to, like, go in there and just clip the tip. Like, maybe preserve this stuff because it's cool detail, but, like, clip this extra bit that sticks down because it doesn't really work with our new pose. I think this leg placement is probably okay. It still feels awkward because I'm so used to gaunts not being in this position that I can't really judge where their legs should be and all that. Also, the thing to check is, it's not essential because you can carve it, but check the flat of the foot and, like, how it's standing and, like, where a flat foot would stand on the ground. Like, get that hoof flat and then try and pose it. You can't see it very well from above, but so just check that pose before you glue it in there. This is the part where you need to make sure that the leg pose works well. This is finicky work because the pin is so small that it really is able to bend any which way, because that looks a little more natural, not just like straightforward. Actually, while that's taking, I will show you the annoying part of the gaunt legs that are not flat on the bottom. And it's not really that annoying. It's just the case that because this leg is not flat on the bottom, what you're going to have to do, there's an added step where you're going to have to do what we just did for the leg or for the tail, but instead you're going to have to cut the hoof off this one and reposition it. And because I'm going to do that, and it's going to be annoying to clean this after, I'm going to clean it now. And we're just going to be repositioned, because you can always have this hoof on, like, a weird angle, and this guy could be, like, running. You could have, like, that hoof down, and this one could be like, yeah, woo, we're going, yeah, going for it. I'm going to show you the hard way, and then you can always do the easy way. So the easy way to confirm is that you just do exactly what you did with the other leg. You put a pin in this one, and then you just kind of glue it on like that, and then he's running. He's like, I'm coming to get you, buddy. But we're going to make them both flat. But what you do is you cut it here, and then you put a little tiny pin in the hoof and a little tiny pin in the shin, and then you can pose it. But I don't think this one's going to cooperate very well, so I think I'll just mail it in and make him running. How should his run look? That's more or less. Okay, I'm going to trim a bit of this big honkin' block off the back of this thing. So just check the front, check the back, and let your super clippers go to work. Later on, I'm going to do some termagants, and for those ones, you're definitely going to have to cut and repose their hoofs because the termagant hoofs are just so crazy. Because they don't actually make contact with the base. So you could be a chump and plastic glue it in, or super glue it, but I'm going to be a champ and I'm going to pin it. I recommend pinning into the upper torso, not into the tail. Again, I'm pinning on such an angle so that I'm using the amount of the place with the most plastic rather than going straight through, rather than going like this. Get your pin, get your glue, put some glue on your pin. Size up where it's going to go so that you know how you have enough pin. You should definitely use reference material to get your poses right. I am not doing that. I will live to regret it. When they all look crazy. So I'm going to dry fit it first, see how it looks. It's also the case that when we're doing this, when we're making the upright termagants or gaunts, we're setting their hips a little wider than a standard gaunt would be, and I don't mind. I feel like it makes them look a little more warrior-like, a little more beefy. If you wanted to, you could like jam them right in there tight, but I don't think it would look as good. Jam her in there. Make sure they don't look too awkward. I checked that the two hips are kind of at the same height. So he's going to be running, but I'll have him bend over a bit more because he's running. Make sure the head still works. He looks like a man on a mission. What I tend to do is I tend to just like get all the rest of the arms on there and then fill it after because I'm impatient, but now is probably the best time to be able to fill the gaps down here. I will do the putty one first because the baking soda is going to get goopy. So let's save that one to last. So if you don't like sculpting, it freaks you out, makes you nervous, you should watch the rest of my sculpting tutorials to make it easier and less nerve-wracking. But we're not actually sculpting right here. We're just gap filling. We just happen to be using epoxy putty to do it. So this is Fix It Sculpt. It's pretty hardy. It sticks things together really well. Another thing that you could use is Abe's epoxy clay. You could even use just like straight up epoxy putty for this sculpting compound because it's pretty solid for kind of filling gaps. Again, you can use green stuff. It's just that we're not going to be sculpting any detail, so green stuff is kind of a waste on this, and green stuff is not super cheap, whereas this stuff is pretty cheap, but it can also take detail. So it's multi-usage. If you have horrible plumber's putty, you can totally use plumber's putty for this because you need to set. You don't need it to set quickly, but plumber's putty will set quickly, which means you can keep moving on with your work. And you're not looking for any detail at this point, so it doesn't really matter what you use in terms of detail sculpting. So I'm just going to mix my part A and part B together, and we'll jam it in the gap there. Okay, so it's mixed. I'm just going to take some of it, take a reasonable amount, and size up the gap I need to fill. So I'm going to fill that right-hand gap. When you're using Abe's products, Epoxy Sculpt, Epoxy Clay, and Fix It, it benefits from, when you first mix it, it's very soft. And if you let it sit for about 10 minutes, it's also very silty, like it'll put silt on your fingers. If you let it sit for about 10 minutes, the silt goes away and it becomes it becomes less soft. So some people prefer that. Me, I'm impatient, so I just get going. But yeah, if that helps you, you can do that. We don't need, so the putty needs to more or less fill the space at this stage, but we don't need to like fill it, because what I usually do is when doing gap filling and stuff like this, I'll fill it with no detail layer, and then I'll come back and do the detail layer after. So you don't want to make it too full now, because it'll be tough to put a detail layer on top of it, because it'll like sit proud of it. If for some reason you haven't watched my sculpting tutorials yet, Nivea is the be-all and end-all of lubricating tools when sculpting with epoxy putty. No, you do not have to wash your models after using Nivea. I swear to God. I have never washed a model, and I've painted them, and everything's fine. So I've crammed it in here loosely, but what I'm going to do when I go with the sculpting tools, I'm going to get it in tighter. I'm using a silicone shaper here. This is sometimes called a color shaper. I don't recommend any. Well, actually, I do recommend the Royal Sovereign brand. You can get color shapers for cheap on Amazon. What you will get is cheap Amazon color shapers, which are frustrating and not as reliable as these ones. So it costs a little bit of money. I think they're about Canadian. They're about $20 or $25 each. So they are not cheap. They're like expensive brushes, but if you take good care of them, they will last you forever. And they are so much easier when sculpting, especially if you're sculpting organics. So I'm just trying to kind of fill that gap, push it down in there. Doesn't have to be perfect, but this is mostly just to make sure that that joint doesn't move anymore once the stuff solidifies, and just to fill the space so that when we come back later, we can sculpt on a detail layer. If you have enough putty and you want to, you can sculpt a detail layer here, like just kind of sculpt some random connective tissue going between them. Just getting a thicker, this is a German bullet silicone shaper. I've only found these in Germany. They're amazing, but hard to find anywhere else. So that just gives me a little more material to push the stuff around with. Yeah, and like when you're doing this, all you want to make sure of is that you don't have any weird bulges sticking out, because you can go in and cut them off later, but it's just annoying. So you want to keep it like only in the gap. You can use Milliput for this if you have Milliput. I think it's annoying. Whatever putty you have that's near to hand and not dear to you, because we don't need dear putty or amazing putty for this part. Just fill in gaps. Getting fancy, putting some detail in here that I'll probably come back and sculpt over, but just in case I don't, just in case it looks good enough, why not? I think that's more or less good. I was agonizing over whether I do the baking soda and super glue trick first, or the epoxy glue or the putty filler first. It's a good thing I chose the putty filler, because super glue and silicone shapers are not friends. I have ruined a very special expensive silicone shaper by shoving it in super glue. You cannot get super glue off of silicone. It is not fun. So yeah, let's do this first and then mess around with super glue. Got more putty, so might as well put a little bit in here to fill that gap where his neck is. Probably put a little bit of detail in here, just kind of stretched flesh, just because this is an annoying place to have to go and add detail in after, especially once you put his head on. Maybe once you got his like gun arm in there and stuff like that, it's gonna be tough to get in here. So yeah, and like also it's a place where you don't really see the detail, so you just need like a little bit of detail that when paint hits it, it'll do the work for you. But you don't need to worry about it being super well sculpted or anything. A suggestion of detail, let's call it that. Also, I tend to put like an armor plate on the back, so I'll probably cover that. Remember how I said don't get your silicone shaper near super glue? This is the part where I make sure the super glue on this neck is definitely dry before I go in here with the silicone shaper. I certainly checked that before I came in here and didn't just start sculpting like a crazy person. The neck is more or less filled, covering up that gap that I left when I put the pin in. And now I will show you the baking soda trick. Okay, get these shapers out of here so I don't destroy them. And let's do the baking soda trick. To do this trick, you need some super glue, some baking soda, and some kind of thing to scoop out baking soda and put it into a small space. It works best with globby super glue. Like this one is gap filling medium. What you want to do is you want to find the gap that you want to fill. So what we want to do is we want to reinforce that little pin in there, and we can get a little bit of the tail as well. So we fill it up with a bunch of super glue, and we got to be really quick. Well, not really quick, but somewhat quick, because the super glue will start to like flow away. The more gap filling it is, the better. So yeah, you just have the super glue globbed in there, get a bunch of baking soda, and just pour it in. And then tap the model so that it goes in, and then take it from the other side. Pour in the baking soda. Don't touch it with your tool because it might harden on your tool. So see how I've got all that baking soda in there? So now I just tap it so it like distributes. It's kind of random. Like I could risk screwing up this detail on the tail because I got some super glue in there and the baking soda is going to harden it. But this hardens almost immediately. I guess it hardens to like a gel consistency at first, but then it'll harden rock solid after. You get a bit of baking soda on your model, but you can just wash that off, wipe it off after you're done. So yeah, you can see there's a bit more here, so I can get a little tricky and put another glob. Don't really touch the tip of your super glue pot to the area because you don't want the baking soda to get on your super glue pot. It's kind of interacting with the baking soda that's already on there. I can grab the stuff that I dropped, put some more on there. But yeah, this is like an instant gap filler, and it's pretty cheap because everyone's got lots of super glue, and probably you've got a lot of baking soda too. Some at least, and you don't need that much. So you just, as long as the super glue is wet, drop some more baking soda on it. Then I just tap the model and the dry baking soda comes off. And yeah, we kind of filled in that whole gap there with the stuff. What it looks like when it's done, I kind of showed this earlier, but you can see here it's solid. So this is a combination of super glue and baking soda. It's kind of translucent. I think I globbed on a lot more super glue on top, but I did both sides here. But it's pretty solid. Like, the downside is that if you fuck up, it's kind of hard to cut out. So again, don't make it come too much out of the gap itself. Let's see actually how hard this is to cut. Oh, actually it's not bad. It's like cutting flying stands. Anyway, so that's the super glue and baking soda trick. That's two different ways that you can fill that gap. Like, we can do the rest of the work here, but we're pretty much there. Everything else is just gluing on bits. So we'll glue on the head. And I said this guy was going to be looking right, I think. His buddy is looking left. His buddy is looking, yes, left. So you are going to be looking right as you're running towards the enemy. Don't tilt down the head too much, because we really want these guys to look like they're upright. You don't want him, like, looking down his chest like that. You want him upright. Look to the right. He's looking up. He's going to have his gun kind of at rest. He's not going to be shooting it. I would say you want to get the other arms on first, because the gun arms go on top. I just got to find some kind of pose. You can make these arms be like more active if you want. I'm not going to bother. So I'll just glob some super glue in here. Or no, sorry, plastic glue. Stick the other arm in there. Get a little pose on. It's kind of a weird pose, but whatever. It's a little goofy from the front. Should have checked that. Oh well. Quick and dirty, right? That's what we're doing here. Quick and dirty. And because my plastic glue is being slow, I'm just going to super glue the rest. Back to my early days in the hobby where I didn't know plastic glue existed. Okay, much swearing later, I think we might have a posed gaunt. God damn. So whoever's bright idea it was to use super glue on this. Fire that guy. Bunch of swearing later. There you go. One upright gaunt. Ready to go and kick ass and take names. So yeah, that's it's not a hard conversion to do. It's just a little bit complicated. The only other point to this is that when you want to attach this guy to a base, once again, like I said before, pinning is your friend. You want to put a pin through this bottom hoof and then stick him into the base, like I've done with these guys. And this guy. Yeah, because gluing that hoof onto the base is not gonna like be very much to hold them. In fact, with these other guys, I'm probably gonna put other pins in their second hooves so they can have 2 hooves pinned to the base. Just because this is it's a very fragile leg, so this guy might be okay. Maybe I'll get some cheeky terrain and put it near his other hoof. He might be fine, but yeah. And then the only other point that I'm probably going to do on him is that I will heat his tail and bend that up. I don't know if you really need to see that. I just do it with a heat gun and then I cool it off with some cold water. And yeah, and then he's hot to trot. I might go and do a little bit of filler work, kind of like on his face and stuff like that. But he's pretty much there. Running and gunning, taking out your enemies. So hopefully that's been helpful for you on how to create upright gaunts to go and take out your enemies. And yeah, give it a go. See how it goes. I may also do a video on doing Homer gaunts. They might be a little more challenging, but for now, there you go. So give it a go. Let me know how it goes. Leave a comment below on this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. I'm told I'm supposed to say that all the time. I honestly want to hear how it works for you. If you try this out, you can reach me. Best way to reach me is on Instagram at Modern Synthesist, all one word. That's Modern Synthesist with a T on the end. Hit me up in the DMs or tag me. DMs is probably the best way to do it. I always reply to my DMs. So I'd love to see what you do. And yeah, if you do it, just let people know that you got the idea from me and maybe send them over here to the channel so that they can watch the video or watch some of my sculpting videos. And let's get everyone sculpting. So yeah, have fun, good luck, and I look forward to hearing from you.
How to sculpt, ooh baby, how to sculpt. Yeah. How to sculpt.
I managed to keep the tail. Oh, that's the part where you stab yourself in the balls. Oh, let's keep that on. It's an extra. It's a bonus. Fuck, come on, super glue. Do your fucking job. Jesus Christ. The worst part of gaunts, lining up the middle fucking armhole. Oh, shit. I hate my life. Everything is super glue. I'm a sacred part of it now. Oh, fuck. Fuck it, I'll fix it in post.